record to the cloud. Awesome. I know. It was a whole thing. Like Steve and I were in the Zoom features trying to get it to work to record to the thing. And I said record to computer is very exciting. And so I recorded to the cloud for more work for Steve today. I will promptly make amends. Love you, Steve. All right, so welcome everyone. We're going to be kicking off the big book study where we left off. And so we're right on page 2 in Bill's study. And Terry, he couldn't make it tonight, so Howard has been thrown under the bus, I think willingly though, and is going to step in and help out. And I've been tired all day. And when I get tired, I get weirder than normal. So just preface that. You know, I was thinking about doing like announcing Howard like he was a boxer, like he was a fighter, like, welcome to the ring, the Titan of 12 Step, the history husband,
Just,
Kathy.
just, just,
Yeah.
pretend, just pretend I'm Terry. You won't even know I'm here.
Oh, no, we're gonna throw to you Kathy's husband, Howard. Pew, pew, pew. And then my Zoom was saying playing music, which is to say, I promise you that wasn't music. Alrighty, so where we're gonna kick off is very, very bottom of page 2, and where it says we gave up our possessions and off we roared on a motorcycle. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to talk a little bit about review before we dive into it. Surprise! I'm sure everyone is shocked that I would do review. But what's happened up until this point? Well, up until this point, Bill Wilson has created a weapon. He has created a metaphorical sword, and that sword was composed of drinking and speculating on Wall Street. And he combined those two elements to forge a sword that he was going to use to hack, to slash, to cut his way through life, to prove that he is important. And so, what he had some previous experience in, he was educated after the First World War. He was educated as a lawyer. Pedantic. I know nobody here relates to that. But that idea of he was a lawyer, and so he was trained and educated to be precise with his words. And then he got a job where he was an investigator for a surety company. And a surety company is a company that gives loans to other businesses. And what he would do was he would investigate these companies and see if they were a good investment, seeing if, would they pay their loan back. And then he got excited with Wall Street, the chaos and the buy, sell, millions are being made, millions are being lost, the excitement of it all. He's like, Wall Street, that's where it's at. And so he had this idea. The idea that he had was, what if we investigated these companies that were investing in on Wall Street just like we did when I worked as an investigator. And that was his idea. And so they quit their job, and him and Lois, we're going to read, they're going to hop in a motorcycle and they're going to go and they're going to investigate these companies. So we gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle. Now, if you care about the timeline, this was April of 1925, where they're going off and they're in the motorcycle. And if you guys are here for the fun facts, we got fun, we got facts, pew pew. It was a Harley Davidson is what it was. So if you want to win at AA trivia, and actually Howard's here, so I can't get away with just making things up. We got to be factually correct, not loosey-goosey. I'll let you know when the goose is loose, though. Yeah.
Let's not be too pedantic here.
Yeah, go ahead. No.
It's chat.
Yeah, if you hold on, it's in the chat. Yeah, you can see a picture of Bill and Lois and the motorcycle. And yeah, I was gonna, delightful. We're on the wavelength. I was gonna throw in the link to the motorcycle hobos, but 1 second. We gave up our positions and off we roared on a motorcycle. The sidecar stuffed with tent, blankets, and a change of clothes and 3 huge volumes of a financial reference service. And so Bill and Lois, they're in this motorcycle, and I love that Howard got the picture of Lois driving. Because oftentimes when I first read this, I don't know about you, I'm like, oh, poor Lois. You know what I mean? That was the lens through which I read Bill's story, was like, Lois put up with a lot. What a jerk Bill is. But she loved motorcycles. And there's a story about like she would go to conferences, like Al Anon conferences, and anytime there was a motorcycle, she'd want to sit on it and have her picture taken. And she loved it. And we are on the very top of page 3. You can tell we made it far. I'm glad you're here, Jill. And welcome everyone as well. And so it says our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed.
What a great
So, yeah,
meeting.
perfect name for a meeting. Perfect name. I hear all the cool kids hang out on Friday. Lunacy commission. And it says, and a lunacy commission was that idea that if somebody was like insane, that they would like get the government involved to be like, oh, we better lock that guy up. You know, basically it's saying our friends thought we were crazy. Perhaps they were right. I had some success at speculation. So we had little money, but we once worked on a farm for a month to avoid drawing on our small capital. And if you're interested, that was the Goldfoot Dairy Farm in Scotia, New York. And Bill and Lois were both paid $75 for that month of work. And what was interesting about that, and what'll dive me into a tangent, an immediate tangent, is this idea that the Goldfoot Dairy Farm, the owner had a son who worked for General Electric. And that was Bill Wilson's in for GE and to investigate that company. And I was talking about that sword that he had, that weapon to cut and hack and slash his way through life to prove he is important. Well, at this point, it's working. Because in 2024, I can't show up to like a fancy company and be like, hey, let me have a look at the books. Tell me what's going on. Where are you spending your money? Where are you wheeling? Where are you dealing? What's up? They'd be like, ma'am, I'm going to ask you to leave. And if you don't, I'm going to call security, which is something I heard a lot in my drinking days. I don't know about you. Only time I've ever been called ma'am, you're making a scene. Otherwise, I don't ma'am very much. But you couldn't do that in the 1930s either. And so what would Bill do? Bill would go to the bars and he would drink with these, the employees and build these relationships. In that old World War II expression, loose lips sink ships. They'd be drinking and maybe sharing a little bit more than they should. And this is working. And it says we covered the whole eastern United States in a year. At the end of it, my reports to Wall Street procured me a position there with the use of a large expense account. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. We are not people who should have expense accounts. Uh-oh, like that's not good. All right. And it says the exercise of an option brought in more money, leaving us with a profit of several $1,000s for that year. So his reports were incredible, and we're going to see that it worked. But what I want to do is I want to toss it over to Howard. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. But Howard, is there anything that you would like to say about that paragraph? Over to you.
Well, yeah, my name is Howard Emer, and I am an alcoholic. You read this section that said, my reports to Wall Street. We're watching for signs of Bill's quest for recognition and status. And his belief was, I'm going to go investigate these companies and we're going to find out what are the problems within the companies where they're not making enough money. And then we're going to figure out a solution for how we can make them better. And then we're going to make decisions to invest in those decisions to implement a program of action that produces results, more money, which is exactly the way Bill approached his problems. He approached drinking that way, and he approached business that way. And he wanted the Wall Street guys to fund him while he went up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And they viewed that as just a vacation. We're not going to pay you to do that until his reports were effective. You mentioned the Goldfoot Farms. There were two boys there that he befriended. One of them worked in the research lab at GE. Now, if you Google what was going on in GE's research lab in the 30s, you'll find they were working on things like televisions and phonographs and radios and light bulbs that didn't explode and cause fires. These things are the things that he saw. Today, that would be considered industrial espionage. But that's what Bill did. He snuck in and saw what was going on, sent word back to New York, and they put him on an expense account. They gave him a salary because they didn't want him giving the information to other companies. So he became their boy at that time. And can you imagine how this dreamer from East Dorset, New York, now feels? He's never had anything in his life. And now all of a sudden, he's successful. And you're about to see that in the next paragraph, but I'm not going to steal Paige's thunder. But the point is, I've gotten successful in the Big Apple of everywhere in New York, on Wall Street. I'm making it big time. And his advice was followed to the tune of millions, but to others to the tune of millions. Everybody's following Bill. That's King Bill of the Kingdom of William. King Bill of Wilson, I'm sorry. King Bill of the Kingdom of Wilson.
I love that. I love that. And so, yeah, let's dive in. And if you're interested, what Howard referenced in the chat and what I put in the chat was a link to. So when Bill and Lois were going up and down the Eastern Seaboard, Lois kept a diary, and she had it like published, and it's the diary of two motorcycle hobos, and you can kind of get a lens into her thoughts and her experiences. And I haven't read all of it because I start on one thing and then get distracted. I know that's a shock to everyone, but it was a real intimate sort of read. So I enjoyed it. So for the next few years, and one of the things is, I know we want to look at Bill's self-centeredness, but there's times where I want to offer Bill a little bit of grace. And this is one of those places that I offer Bill a little bit of grace, where I say, for the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I think looking back, he's able to look back with a little bit of humility and see that it was fortune, that it wasn't all Mr. Bill, King Bill, who's about to get smashed right into by capital K, capital A, King Alcohol. Fun little tie-in. that, that's subjective. All right. For the next few years, fortune threw money and applause my way. I had arrived. Here we are. You can make a note of that, because Bill is, king of the hill. King of the Hill Bill. I'm so sorry. I have taken your delightful metaphor and ruined it. King of the Hill Bill. He is living large and in charge. He's rocking and rolling. He's big old Bill. And this moment. He has proved to the world he is important, but we're going to see very quickly the disillusionment of this experience, how quickly this falls apart. So my judgment and ideas were followed by many to the tune of paper millions. The great boom of the late 20s was seething and swelling. That excitement. If you've ever seen any movies or anything from the 1920s, it was a period of great economic boom. There was the Art Deco style. There were the flapper, dresses. The dresses were getting short, and things were getting exciting. And you think the Great Gatsby. There's money and champagne, and it's whoa, woo. It's exciting. And it says drink was taking an important and exhilarating part in my life. And I always want to make a note of that. Because if you ask somebody who does not have alcoholism, what is important to you? In my experience, they tend to not say alcohol. In my experience, if I ask somebody what is important to you, they might say their work. They might say their passions. They might say their family. They might say certain values that they have, maybe a faith, maybe a religion, maybe goals, maybe dreams. But they're not saying drink is important to them. Now, if I take somebody who doesn't have alcoholism or addiction or whatever brings you to this all inclusive study, and I say, what is exhilarating in your life? You know, it might be somebody starting a business, starting a family, taking risks, maybe windsurfing, skydiving, I don't know, doing things. But they're not saying drinking is exhilarating. They're not saying it's important. And what to me that points to is Bill Wilson getting that sense of ease and comfort. Alcohol is working for him. And I mean, it's working for him. He had arrived and it feels good. It is working. And it says there was loud talk in the jazz places uptown. Everyone spent in thousands and chattered in millions. Scoffers could scoff and be damned. To scoff is that, a scoff is similar to a guffaw, which is very helpful. It's like that, like dry laugh, like, you, Bill, and your ideas. They could scoff and to heck with them. And then it says, I made a host of fair weather friends. A fair weather friend is a friend that is with you in the good times. And how often we come to page 3 and, fair weather friends. Yes, I had many a fair weather friend. My experience, it takes some inventory for me to get to that place where I can see that I was a fair weather friend. Ooh, rude. Rude to point that out. Rude. Not cool. Well, since that was uncool, I'll toss it over to Howard to bring in the cool. Pew pew. Over to you, Howard.
Okay. One of the things I like to look for when we go through Bill's story is signs of his progression. His descent into hell, I think, is what Alice calls it. I've heard other people call it the doom cycle, which is to watch for the signs as things get worse for Bill. And in terms of drinking, we just came across one of those. In the beginning, the first page, he was drinking for fun. Moments sublime with intervals hilarious. It's fun. But the second stage of drinking, which is drinking to function, he's now approaching, where it says, drinking was playing an important and exhilarating part of my life. Important came first, exhilarating came second. And by the very next paragraph, we have fully moved into that second category of drinking to function. And again, I'm not going to steal Paige's thunder, but that's what the next paragraph begins with. We've moved very quickly from drinking is important and exhilarating to drinking was more serious all day and all night. That's a whole different ballgame. We're also looking at how Bill's life is now more out of his hands, where things are being driven. Bill is not making decisions about things. He's being driven for one reason or another, and it's always alcohol at the bottom, but watch for that use of driven. On page 2, he said, my drive for success was on. That was the beginning of that. So watch for all of those little things about his progression and his sinking into alcoholism. Thank you.
Absolutely. And Howard, if any point you want to take a paragraph, take the lead on, go ahead. So feel free. Thunder given. Not even stolen. Thunder given.
Want me to do this? Where are we for the next few years?
My drinking assume more serious
Sure.
proportion.
So Bill's successful. Now let's see where his drinking is taking him, right? My drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night. So now it's more important than it was exhilarating. Before it was exhilarating, now it's real important. If you're drinking all day, it's serious. So this is an indication of his descent. He's now drinking all day. The remonstrances of my friends were terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. So he's one more indication of that doom cycle where he's choosing the alcohol over his friends. His friends are telling him, whoa, Bill, take it easy, give it a rest, maybe stop hitting that bottle so hard. Well, from the moment I started using, everybody around me would say that, take it easy. You don't have to use it all up today. Well, I damn well think I have to, because that's what this is about. So Bill is dealing with alcohol taking over his life. Scoffers get scoff and be damned. There were many unhappy scenes. Well, let's continue this paragraph. The remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row, and I became a lone wolf. He's choosing alcohol over his friends. There were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. Again, it's not just large. It's not just a large apartment. It's not a fancy apartment. It is a sumptuous apartment. Status, recognition. And if you know the story, Bill bought an apartment on Park Avenue that overlooked Central Park, but it wasn't as large as he wanted it to be. It wasn't the largest one in the building. So what he did is he bought the home adjacent to that, and he knocked through the walls. So he now had the largest apartment in the building. This is big money. This is big money that we're talking about here. Buying apartments on Park Avenue overlooking Central Park. There's a lot of money floating in his direction. And what is he doing with it? He's pissing it away. Okay, continuing. Here's one of my favorite parts of the book. I believe everything in this book. I have doubts about the next sentence because, Bill wrote a book that said, as Bill sees it. Lois wrote a book called As Lois Remembers, and they're not necessarily the same thing. And we're about to see what I'm talking about. He said, there were many unhappy scenes in our sumptuous apartment. There had been no real infidelities. I think he tends to look at infidelities the way Bill Clinton used to look at them. Remember Bill Clinton when they asked him, what is your relationship with Monica Lewinsky? And his answer was, depends on what your definition of is. So you got to love it. You got to love Bill Wilson here. And incidentally, in the original manuscript, we'll always go back to this. What he said was there were no great infidelities. He changed the word great to real. I don't know what the difference is. What's the difference between a great and a real infidelity? Well, according to Bill, there is a difference. There had been helped at times by extreme drunkenness kept me out of these scrapes. I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it talks about how his drinking assumed more serious proportions, continuing all day and almost every night, if you're writing in your book, and I hear that's what the cool kids are doing, you bunch of cool kids, you can make a little note that that is the physical allergy. Because somebody who has the ability to control the amount they take once they start to drink is not drinking all day and almost every night. Do you know what I'm saying? If I have the ability to control it, I'm stopping, I'm slowing down. And so when it talks about, I love the remonstrances of my friends terminated in a row when I became lone wolf. Well, yes, I know exactly what we're talking about, Whit. So it's exactly what Howard was saying. It's like people were getting on Bill Wilson's case. Bill, you can't show up to work drunk. Bill, I'm worried about your drinking. Bill, I'm concerned. And Bill is saying, go F yourself. Don't tell me what to do. Back off, mofo, like getting those fighting words. And he starts losing friends and losing relationships. And I want to see myself in Bill's story and Bill's experience in mine. Do I know what it's like to have people worried about my drinking long before I was worried about my drinking? And do I know what it's like when people are saying, Paige, I'm worried about your drinking, I'm worried about your drug use, for me to dismiss them? To start losing loved ones, start losing relationships, start losing those things that were important. So he's isolating himself. And yeah, I had to look up because Rob, we don't have Rob. So I got the definition, and it's like luxurious. And I love that you dove in on that. Now, I'll say about the infidelity, there had been no real infidelity for loyalty to my wife, helped at times by extreme drunkenness. Now, I read between the lines. I know what that means, Bill. That means you're a little too drunk to be at attention for that infidelity. That's what that means. And listen, when I first was reading this book and reading Bill's story, I'm nothing like Bill. I can't relate to Bill. Oh, Wall Street guy, money guy, ego guy, cheated on his wife. I can't stand him. But the more I read this book with people who were experienced with this book, not just armed with facts about their lives, but has like that, well, I guess, yeah, armed with facts about themselves, their lives in this book, working through their lives, the directions more and more opened up to me. And so what I will suppose, or what I will propose, I don't know, it's supposition or proposition. I don't know the definition. I do. But let's have a look. Is my experience. I'm not talking about anyone else's here, especially if we got couples on screen. We won't ask this question. But it's just me. Is my experience that once I started to drink, that allergy that I had caused me to cross sexual boundaries that I would have never crossed when I was sober, and caused me to do things that led me with a tremendous amount of guilt and shame that I would not do if I was a 3-drink sort of gal. Do you know what I mean? Or a 3 hoots of crack sort of gal. Like a lady, right? Pinkies up. That's how we know. So can I relate to that? So in 1929, I contracted Gulf fever. And I want you to know Gulf fever is highly contagious. You got to wash your hands. I'm just kidding. What that means is he got excited about golf. He just got jazzercised about golf. Jazzercised is the official term. Just woo, golf. So he got excited about golf. We went at once to the country, my wife to applaud, while I started out to overtake Walter Hagen. Now, if you don't know who Walter Hagen is, that's probably a normal reaction. Unless you're a golf aficionado, in which you're like, of course I know who Walter Hagen is, Paige. In which case, I'm very sorry for coming to the assumption that you did not know who Walter Hagen is. I didn't, because golf is not a thing that I'm as interested in as other things. So I didn't know who that was. But Walter Hagen, he won 11 majors. Walter Hagen was like a one of the best golfers of all time. Now, Howard put in the chat that this Saturday, that you guys are going to have the movie night. You can watch My Name is Bill
Sunday.
W.
Sunday.
Sunday. I knew I was going to say one of the dates, and I knew whatever I said was going to be wrong. I just knew that. That's why I had that little question mark. You could hear it in my tone. Sunday, don't miss it. Sunday fun day. I'm gonna watch a movie. But if they do that again, which they might, if by popular demand, what they could do is they could put on The Legend of Bagger Vance. I don't know if anyone's seen that movie. I promise you I have not. It's about golf. And it's about Walter Hagen. So if you think Walter Hagen, think Tiger Woods. Or if you're really not a golf person, think Wayne Gretzky. I don't know how many Canadians we have today. Think Wayne Gretzky. If you're not a Canadian, think Michael Jordan. I'm going to be contentious. I'm going to say LeBron James. Maybe Kobe Bryant. I don't know. And then baseball, a really good baseball person. Sports. And if you don't like sports, that's reasonable. That's fair. No pressure. No pressure to get no pressure to get this metaphor the way I'm explaining it. So, and it says, so what's the thrust of that sentence? My wife to applaud while I started to overtake Walter Hagen. Now, this is not diagnostic of alcoholism, and I think Howard's going to grab a hold and talk more about this. No pressure, though. Tigers, he's got the tiger for Tiger Woods. But that idea that do I have to be the best? And I have a feeling he's going to grab that drive for success, right? Have I ever gotten hyper fixated on a hobby or an activity and I can't do it if I'm not the best? And what this says is liquor caught up with me much faster than I came up behind Walter. So his alcoholism is catching up with him. And now what we're starting to see is some physical symptoms that pertain to the physical allergy. We're starting to see some consequences as the result of his inability to control his drinking. It says, I began to be jittery in the morning, so some early signs of DTs. But then we have a hard pivot. Golf, golf, golf permitted drinking every day and every night. And so again, we're seeing some of the importance and the focus that we have on drinking, how important it is. And he says it was fun to roam around the exclusive course which had inspired such awe in me as a lad. Now that exclusive course, welcome, we're on page 4. The exclusive course was the Equinox Country Club in Manchester, Vermont. Unless Howard has something else, in which case Howard is right. Uh, but I got the Equinox Country Club in Manchester, Vermont. And the thing is that golf historically, golf was, yeah, bounce, glance, just, oh, I'm golfing. But doesn't carome sound fancy rather than I'm hitting some balls on the driving range? No, it's I am golfing with elegance. Uh, and that exclusive course. So historically, golf was a wealthy white man's game. It was it was not for, it was for like these like very exclusive, very important, and we see that drive and that pull to prove that he is worthy. And look, here he is. And he describes it as, I acquired the impeccable coat of tan one sees upon the well-to-do. He's wealthy enough to be golfing, so he's got a tan. Now that coat of tan screams to me far more a coat of armor. That coat of tan is like he's got that weapon to prove he's important, but that coat of tan is that armor so you don't look too closely to see that deep insecurity. The local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amused skepticism. So he's throwing in money, money's going in, money's going out, and he's skeptical. The bank teller is skeptical that this is going to last. Over to you, Howard. Pew pew.
Okay. First of all, I put in the chat something about the Equinox Country Club. At the time, the president of the club was Robert Todd Lincoln. And if that sounds familiar, it's the son of the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln's son. This was a very restricted, the word they used in those days was exclusive. You had to be the right color, the right religion, the right money to play there. And Bill, as a boy, since he lived there, because he wasn't wealthy enough to just summer in Vermont, he lived there with all of the natives. He would watch all of the millionaires going around playing golf, and him saying, one day that'll be me. One day that'll be me. And I just want to bring your attention to something I mentioned previously, this descent into doom, Bill's descent into hell, and how on the previous page, if you want to keep track of these things, in the very first paragraph, his drinking becomes a priority. In paragraph 1, he says, my drinking was taking an important and exhilarating part of my life. That's drinking for a priority. Later on in the next paragraph, he says it was continuous. So now it's a priority, it's continuous, and now he's beginning to lose relationships and friends because of it when he chooses alcohol over his friends. And then the isolation begins. Every one of us runs into that sooner or later where it's just us and the bottle. And that's what's happening with Bill. He became a lone wolf. And then, as you just mentioned so acutely, the DTs started. The bottom of the page, the DTs started. That's the examples of his descent in one page, just in one page. And I'll wrap up with this. The comment you made about the local banker watched me whirl fat checks in and out of his till with amazed skepticism. This guy knew something was wrong. This guy is a banker in a community that is basically during the summer months is populated by millionaires who keep their money not in a coffee can, in a bank. And he's the manager of the bank. So he knows the patterns of spending of wealthy people. And this clown from New York is not one of them. This jerk is depositing his checks, and just as soon he's writing checks out of the account to the same amount. And it's like I could practically see the guy just standing there in the lobby watching, just laughing as Bill is going in and out with his money, saying, "This thing is not going to last forever. This bubble is going to burst, and I just want to be here when it happens." So I love that part of this where he talks about the local banker watching with amusement. And I'll leave it to you. You can go through the next chapter, the next paragraph.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And it's funny as you're talking about the like what Bill's bank balance was looking like. I'm just gonna throw it out. Does that sound a little familiar to any of our bank balances? Now, I will tell you, there were not fat checks going in and out of the till that I had anything to do with. But if you were to look at my bank statement, what you would see is liquor store, ATM withdrawal. You guys know the order: ATM withdrawal, ATM withdrawal, ATM withdrawal, liquor store, liquor store. You know what I mean? And I'm like, nobody knows. And I'm like, doesn't take much to look at that, like, and there is that thing. If I genuinely did not do it, but I've sponsored some people, and I know my ex did it quite a bit. It's called where you go to the ATM and you put in a deposit with a blank envelope and you take out money that is not there. They know. Did you know they know? Shocker. There's some amused skepticism with those banking practices too. Bill wasn't doing that, probably, maybe. I don't know. I'll say he was, and then Howard will correct me after. All right. All right. So abruptly, in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange. So this, I believe it was called Bloody Monday, and it was the stock market crash that eventually plunged the United States and the world into the Great Depression. Now, I want to point something out. Bill Wilson's, his fat checks, but more importantly, yeah, absolutely. 40 withdrawal, 40 withdrawal, 40 withdrawal. And that's how you know, by the way. So in the chat, somebody was saying that's what it looked like, $40 withdrawal. That's how you know we're delusional, because we're just like, only $40 more. Not just taking out the whole thing right away. We're like, no, only 40. Uh, but abruptly in October 1929, hell broke loose on the New York Stock Exchange after one of those days of New York Stock Exchange. And so, as we're talking about that, what we're talking about is that stock market crash. But Bill Wilson's money is in the stock market. But more important than his money being in the stock market, his whole sense of value and esteem and worth is wrapped up in the stock market, and it's plummeted. And it says, after one of those days of inferno, an inferno was a raging fire. Think after one of those days of hell. That's what he went through. I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. It was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market had closed. I wanna break this down a little bit, because there is some pertinent information in these few sentences that I missed for a long time. The first is Bill Wilson is going from a hotel bar to the brokerage office, and it says 5 hours after the market is closed. No new information is coming in. The market is closed. Nothing is changing. Why is he going to the office to check the stocks? So what I want to throw out there is what probably happened. Well, at this time in history, like, money was being lost. It was a really, really stressful time. And I wonder if, some of these guys in the office went out, had a bit of a lunch, and had a couple drinks at lunch to unwind. And most of them went back to the office. And one of them stayed at the hotel bar. Do you know what I'm saying? And I always want to point something about this. You can make a little note that what we're talking about here is the physical allergy. But it says, I wobbled from a hotel bar to a brokerage office. A wobble. Do you know who wobbles? Alcoholics and penguins, no one else. No one else. Toddlers. Well, toddlers will toddle. Alcoholics will wobble. Penguins wobble. Listen, if we are wobbling, we are at a point where we are drinking due to the allergy. You know what I mean? The allergy has us. We are drinking ourselves into a wobble, physical allergy, 100%. And so the ticker's still cluttered. And so, like, keep in mind, I live in Alberta, and where I live is heavily influenced by the oil and gas, and our economy very much based on oil and gas. And there was a period of time, I'm so bad at time orientation, where I'm like, I don't know if it was yesterday or 10 years ago, I'm not sure, but there was a time when the oil and gas market crashed, and it like bottomed out, and there were massive layoffs at these oil and gas companies, and it was kind of like a really interesting equivalent to see what was happening. And it was at a time where most people were being affected by this, and it trickled down. It began to affect everyone in almost every industry. But the people who were affected, what were they doing? Well, most people were, trying to like update their resume, seeing if they could go into a different sector, seeing what they could do to secure jobs, maybe going back to school. They were all hands on deck. What can we do? Bill Wilson is getting so drunk he can't walk straight. And this is what gives him his whole sense of worth and value and identity and those fat checks. So it was 8 o'clock, 5 hours after the market had closed. The ticker still clattered. And the ticker in 2024, if you go have a look at the finance channel on TV, you can tell I don't. It's about as interesting for me as golf. But they'll have it, the ticker is what'll go at the bottom of the screen, and it'll like tell you what the stocks are doing. And I don't know, green up, red down. So it was a very literal papered ticker, but the ticker still clattered. I was staring at an inch of tape, which bore the inscription XYZ -32. It had been 52 that morning. So XYZ is a placeholder. It's just an anonymous name. Kind of like as we go on in the book, we'll hear about like Fred and Jim. That wasn't really their name. Spoilers. uh, good. So XYZ was actually PFK, which is Pennock and Ford. And so imagine in that morning you had invested $1, just $1 in Pennock and Ford. You would have had $52 in the morning, and by the time the market had closed, it was -32, like owing $32. Done. That happened where the price of oil was like negative. And like, so it was so interesting for me with my little big book brain. And I'm like, oh, Pennock and Ford, but in the 2000s. I didn't say delightful. That was not delightful, but it was just interesting. And so, but imagine you had your life saving in a company like Pennock and Ford. It's done. It's done. So I was finished, and so were many friends. The papers reported men jumping to death from the towers of capital H, capital F, high finance. And I know that high finance is kind of how that's written, but I often talk about when we see words that are capitalized, they are synonyms for God. And I will tell you, capital H, capital F, high finance was for sure Bill Wilson's God at that time in his life. And so the newspapers are reporting these men jumping out of their offices out of hopelessness and desperation. And it was not quite really happening like that, but that's how it was reported. And that's what Bill Wilson reads. And Bill Wilson, what we see is his finance ruined, absolutely ruined. And this is his response to seeing and hearing about people in his exact same predicament resorting to suicide. That disgusted me. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. And what you can do is you can make a little note as we go through the cycle. What we see is he is still getting that ease and comfort. Suicide, not an option for Bill. Why? Because he's got ease and comfort. Disgusts him. I would not jump. I went back to the bar. And I don't know if you guys know what it's like to get a couple drinks in, or get a couple hoots in, or a couple pills in, or a couple whatever brings you to this study. But that feeling of ease and comfort, and it's all like, my friends have dropped several million since 10 o'clock. So what? So what? Tomorrow was another day. You know that? When you're a little, so what? We got it. Yeah, you're my best friend, So you know. Uh, tomorrow was another day as I drank. The old fierce determination to win came back, that need to win. But again, it's giving him that sense of ease and comfort. Over you, Howard. Pew pew.
Okay. Um, next morning, is that where we're at? Next morning?
Absolutely, unless you wanted to say anything about about that paragraph you
Well,
read.
yeah, I was just about to put something, that's why I was a little out of it there. I was about to put something in the chat that you might find interesting, that this was actually happening. People were jumping from windows. Um, most people at that time bought stocks on margin, which meant there was an account set up, and you'd call your rep, your agent, whatever, and you tell them go buy Penn and Fenwick at 20 points, and let's say it goes up to 30. They would take the money out of your account to spend for the 20 and then put the profit back in. But if it goes down, they take the money out. And what was happening here is stock values were disappearing, and people who were buying on margin were being wiped out. They didn't have enough money in their margin accounts to cover it. These accounts were being called, and they didn't have the money. So a lot of people figured, well, I've got a life insurance policy and I'm going to maybe collect on that. So that's what some of these people were doing. They were jumping out of windows so they can collect on the insurance so their families were left with something. um, and again, I think I love the fact that you picked up the fact that he went from the hotel bar to the office. Most people go from the office to the bar. Bill follows a different drummer. Once again, signs of his decline. Um, that disgusted me. I wouldn't jump. I went back to the bar. So he's too hip for suicide. He'll drink himself to death. And their old determination to win came back. Did you know determination to win is a reference to liquid courage, right? Did you know that the original origination of that term came from Dutch courage? Dutch courage was drinking, and that strength that you get. I'll come back and I'll tell them, and that fortitude. But they stopped using it because it was insulting to the Dutch people. For some reason, the Dutch people were considered heavy drinkers. I don't know. Maybe it should have been called Irish courage. I don't know, but it's accusing a nationality of something that is not fair. So they stopped using that expression. Liquid courage seems a lot better. And I'm sure we can all identify with that, right? The more we take, the more I'm going to get even. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get them. I'm going to show them. I'm going to do. Can I get another one? I'm going to show them, and I'm going to buy another one, please. As we drank and as we took the hits or the shots or the pills, all that courage got bigger and bigger and bigger. And that's important because there's a crash coming later, and he has a totally different reaction to it. His reaction to this one is, I'm coming back. You're not going to keep me down. So the next morning, I telephoned a friend in Montreal. He had plenty of money left and thought I'd better go to Canada. By the following spring, we were living in our accustomed style, living large. The guy he called in Canada, I love this guy. His name is Richard Johnson
Dick.
or Dick Johnson, as the abbreviation, Dick Johnson, from the company of Green Shields and Company. And once I'm done babbling, I'll put something up in the chat that has a picture of him and a reference to who this guy is, because the market there was not as affected severely as it was here. So he went there and he said, we were living in our accustomed style. And I'm going to show you in the chat in a minute the cars that he was driving, the kind of places, the houses he was living in. He was in Fat City, without a doubt. He has come back. Now I felt like Napoleon returning from Elba. No Saint Helena for me. Napoleon was the Emperor of France. He declared war on the European powers, which eventually became England and France, and I'm sorry, not France, England and Germany and Russia and so on, but they were just called the European powers then. He declared war on them because he wanted to be the Emperor of Europe, and he lost. He lost. And what the European powers did is they banished him, they exiled him to Elba, to an island called Elba. But they let him keep his troops and they let him keep his title. So he was still Emperor of Elba and he had his troops with him. He had his army with him. What do you think he did? Huh? Any ideas what this power hungry maniac might have done with all of the troops that they sent with him? He came back. With a year, he was back. Within a year, he was back on the continent, declaring war, but and lost again within a year. And this time, they sent him to a place called Saint Helena, which is this barren rock in the middle of, I think, the Indian Ocean. And he was exiled there, kept under house arrest. He didn't have his troops, he didn't have his title, and eventually died there. Why is this important? Because of the symbolism involved. He came back from Elba. So Elba represents vindication. He came back from it. Elba was vindication. Final, absolute, total defeat of St. Helena because he never came back from that. So what Bill is saying is coming back from Elba, I felt like him. I felt vindicated that there was going to be no absolute failure for me. What represented absolute failure to Napoleon was St. Helena. That's the whole point of the Napoleon business here. You didn't think we were going to talk about history, right? We may be talking about math before. In fact, actually, we could talk about math when it comes to those stocks that say they went down a certain number, but we're not going to do that. We'll not do the math. We'll not go back into that. You could talk about 182 Clinton Street, and then I'll put up some stuff for it. So go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Now I just wanted to dive in a little with Napoleon, because he's my guy. Uh, I I shouldn't say he's my guy because that's a little. Ooh. But one of the things about Napoleon that I find so interesting, and actually I just did this like chaos last minute, so I'm just gonna have this crazy chaos screen share. This is this painting of the coronation of Napoleon. I think there's a better painting. I shouldn't say better. Um, because that one's pretty fancy. But one of the things is when Napoleon came to power, Howard described him as an emperor, which is interesting language. Because before Napoleon, what they had was kings and queens. And when Napoleon came to power, he was like, I'm the emperor. And so there's this beautiful metaphor that before Napoleon, there was this belief that the rulers of France were ordained by God. And it was this God given bloodline. I don't subscribe to this belief, but this God given bloodline to keep the power where it should be. And God, and so when a king would be brought to power, the Pope would do the coronation and symbolically put the crown on the head as a sign that this is God says this is okay. That's what would happen. And when Napoleon came to power, we can kind of see that the Pope's over there just kind of hanging out, and Napoleon is putting the crown on his own head, which is to say the idea that like who was running Bill Wilson's life was Bill Wilson. Napoleon is, I am the emperor because I say so. Just like Bill Wilson is the emperor of his own life. You know, like he is king of Bill Wilson's life because he says so. And I will let you know my goal is mitigated. I don't have that unmitigated goal where I'm like, I'm Empress Paige. I shall have grapes. And fan me, please. It's too cold. Please don't fan me. I need like a heater or something. That's my goal. Is not. It's not. My life is not ornate. I'm behind the dumpster with wet pants. That's who I am. But when we have a look at the idea of like being king or queen or the ruler or emperor, empress, ruler of my own life, did I not think I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt what was best for me and what was right for me? And the truth is, I did, and I was wrong. All right, so next paragraph. Um, and one oh before that it says I want to point something out. It said, but drinking caught up with me again, and my generous friend had to let me go. This time we stayed broke. It is alcohol that caught up with him. The consequences of the physical allergy. That's why he lost the job with his homie Dick Johnson. Also, I love when we talk about that paragraph in an international meeting because I get to be like, good, go to Canada. There's no alcoholics in Canada. Like we know what's up. So drinking caught up with him, the allergy. Now it says we went to live with my wife's parents. Ooh. Anyone here excited about the prospect of having to move in with the in-laws? Ugh. And keep in mind, this man of power, influence, status, the emperor of his life, he's living with his wife's parents. His life is not going how he wanted it. And the address is 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn, New York. And they lived there until 1938. Or in 1939, I believe. 38 or 39. Howard will correct me. And we'll wrap it up after this paragraph. And so what that means is they lost the family home in sobriety. In sobriety. And so it says, I found a job, and man, he needed that job. He was working as an investigator again, and it was $100 a week, which was good pay in those days, but he desperately needed it because he and Lois were about $60,000 in debt. So he needed that money and then lost it as the result of a brawl with the taxi driver. I'm just going to throw it out there. Those who have the physical allergy are the only ones that are brawling with taxi drivers. Do you know what I mean? That's us. I had a sponsor one time I was working with, and I made that joke, and she was like, "Oh," and I'm like, "Oh, we got some amends to make there." Like delightful. Actually, anyone that's worked with me knows they'll be like, "And I burned down an orphanage." I'm like, wonderful, we'll make an amends. That's kind of my thing. They're like, I'm sharing with you horrific stuff, and I'm like, wonderful. So lost it as a result of a brawl with the taxi driver. Mercifully, no one could guess that I was to have no real employment for 5 years. Now, that is from 1930 when he was working after he got fired in Canada until he sobered up at the end of 34. That's those 5 years, or hardly draw a sober breath. My wife began to work in a department store, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. So Lois was working at places like Macy's, where she would do those corner displays and stuff like that, and she was making $19 a week. And he's taken from her, and she's supporting the family, and he can't even make it to work. Can I relate to that? Can I relate to be the disappointment? Can I relate to not showing up to life how I wanted to show up to life? And I did a big book study a long time ago with somebody who did not appreciate my tangents or fun facts as much as Howard obviously does. And Terry begrudgingly, now Terry's so good. Terry's so good to me. He so appreciates it. But there was this one time that I was telling the Dick Johnson story, and he didn't find it funny. This other person, and he's like, when we got the taxi cab driver, he's like, you find that taxi cab driver. Oh, I can't tell you how much work I did to try to find that taxi driver. So I wasn't able to find the taxi driver. Howard will tell you that we don't know who the taxi cab driver is, but Howard will share some fun facts, some info, and then we'll wrap up because I know we're over time, but this is a great place to end it. So over to you, Howard. Pew pew. Pew pew.
Okay. we went to live with my wife's parents. That's 182 Clinton Street in Brooklyn. I found a job, then lost it as a result of a brawl with a taxi driver. Please bear that in mind. Remember this for a moment. He lost the job. He was working for a guy named Joe Hirschensorn, Hirschorn. One of my people. One of my people coming from good stock, the chosen people. In any case, he lost his job, but this guy liked Bill. Hirschenson was hired him even though he knew he was an alcoholic, and he kept him on, but because of this, he had to let him go. And he let him go with a severance check of $2,000. So he lost the job as a result of this brawl. He goes home, and Bill gives the $2,000 check to Lois. Great job. Come home with a big check, give it to Lois, take her out to dinner. She didn't make it too far because he passed out halfway through the initial entrees and so on. And the next morning, when they woke up, or in Bill's case, came to, what do you think happened? He asked for the check back. What did you think was going to happen the next morning? She gave him the check back, and he used that check as a basis to invest in something that we're going to talk about maybe today, maybe next meeting. That is the famous Jersey Lightning story. He bought his way into that investment with this $2,000, and if he drank and violated his agreement, he would lose the $2,000. But he needed the $2,000 to buy into this deal. So keep in mind this $2,000 that's floating around here. No one would guess I was to have no real employment for 5 years or hardly draw a sober breath. One more step in that descent of Bill's. My wife began to work in a department store, Macy's, coming home exhausted to find me drunk. Isn't that a great sight? She was working, incidentally, for $19 a week. Now, to put that in terms of today's dollars, it still sucks. It's $340 a week. I don't know how you live on something like that, but that's what she was getting paid. Okay. And she comes home and finds this bum sleeping on the couch. Okay. Um, I became an unwelcome hanger on at brokerage places. He would go to places where he used to be the knight in shining armor, where everybody would take his advice to the tune of millions. And he's showing up there and he's dirty and he's drunk and he's loud and he's no longer that fair-haired boy. He's embarrassing. And the people are saying, Bill, please leave. We don't want to have you arrested, but we will if we have to. Please get out of here and don't come back. That's what that's all referring to. And
Well,
when
and I think
Paige reads
we're
the next paragraph, I'm going to
I think
put
we're
in
good to
the
leave it
chat.
there.
Huh?
Yeah, we're 6 minutes over. So why don't and that was on me. Why don't we leave it there? And no, you're great, Howard. It was all I knew we were gonna go over a little. I didn't want to stop you, but that's a perfect place for us to stop the recording. I'll wrap up with no, you did great.
That's great. I'm going to still put the pictures in the
Please
chat that I'm
do.
referring to, and
Please
we'll go
do.
from there.
Awesome. I'll stop the recording and we can wrap up with the serenity prayer.